What was it like to be at Washington College in 1966? Well, I think it can best be described for me as being tolerated rather than welcomed. The first instance of that feeling came about when I checked into my dorm room and found out that I had been assigned a single room and no roommate. Interestingly enough, my room was at the far end of the hallway on the second floor of Caroline House, tucked away from everything and everybody because nobody had to pass by my room to go anywhere else in the dorm. I was the one who had to pass by everyone else's room. And if you didn't know I was back there, you had no reason to check on me or to see me until I emerged from the room. I later learned that girls had been asked if they wanted to room with me in advance, and they said no. Imagine that. They hadn't seen me, didn't know me, but yet they said no. They didn't want a room with a black person. Okay, that was fine with me because I learned that that single room, tucked away in the corner, became my safe haven. There were times during the early weeks at the college that I had to make an adjustment of being there by myself and not having days when nobody would talk to me. Everybody looked past me as if I were invisible. And even my professors didn't call on me in class when I raised my hand. They looked over me as well. This was hard for the first few weeks. I had never experienced anything like this in my entire life. I was coming from a place where I had been welcomed, where I had been embraced, where my teachers were supportive, where I was loved, where I had community. And I was coming to a place where none of that existed. It was hard getting used to, but I did eventually. Not get used to the treatment, I don't want to ever say that, but I found ways to cope. I think that's the better description. I think that understanding my backstory of how I ended up at Washington College is important as well. You see, I never intended to come to Washington College. I actually had applied to only one school because I knew my academic preparation and my background allowed me and made it possible for me to go to any college that I wanted. I was 18th in a class of 704 students, and those 17 students above me were all in my class. So I knew that I had what it took to get to college, be accepted in any college, and I knew that I wanted to go to one college in Philadelphia, and I applied there. Sometime in June, mid-June, I got a letter from the college, and I remember specifically the wording. It said that I was not being accepted for admission because the school had reached its quota of blacks and Jews. I tell you, it was as specific as that. I was being rejected for admission to this university in Philadelphia because I was black. Needless to say, I was devastated. And I had no other alternative. I hadn't applied to any other schools because I was that sure that based on academics, not race, that I was a good candidate and that I would get in. Well, shortly after receiving that letter, I got a call from my guidance counselor, at high school, in my high school, who said, I've got a scholarship available if you want it. Evidently, he knew that I had been rejected by this university in Philadelphia, and they were trying to find a better way for me to get to college. So when he told me that the scholarship was to Washington College, I had not heard of this school at all, and I immediately went to the library to do some research, and the research didn't yield much, so I told him, I said, well, I'll go visit and I'll see. So I made arrangements to come to campus. This would have been still in mid-June, maybe early August. So there were no students on campus, and I met with the admissions director at the time, Harold Gray. He gave me the, 2-cent tour of the college, and I asked him directly, I said, how many black students do you have here? And he held his head down for a minute, and he said quietly, well, if you come, there'll be one. I don't remember my immediate reaction, but I just had no sense of peace, about coming to Washington College. But I was desperate. I hadn't gotten into the college of my choice. My high school buddies, they were all set, ready to go to college. They had been accepted in all their schools, and I was the only one out here that didn't have a place to go. And so the scholarship looked tempting for that reason alone. And as you can see, I accepted the scholarship, thinking that if I didn't like it, I could leave in a year and transfer out somewhere else. So fast forward, here I am in the dorm, in my private dorm room, which turned out to be a godsend, actually. And campus life was pretty tough. I could spend days on campus and not have a conversation initiated by anyone on campus at all. I walked through campus. We had about 635 students at the time. And I could walk over the campus and not have one student not even say as much as good morning. Their eyes were always diverted from me. I'd look in their eyes, and their eyes would look past me, almost as if I were invisible. When I was in the cafeteria, I would sit at a table. I would get there early, and I would sit at a table, and no one would come to sit with me initially. That changed a little bit as the time went on. Someone, I guess, I hope it wasn't out of feeling sorry for me, but a couple people would come over and sit near me at the same table. Yeah. Classroom was really tough because some of my professors would ignore me in class. I'd raise my hand to ask a question or to give an answer to a question that the professor would pose, and they would overlook me, and then time would run out and the class would be over. But this one particular professor, I'll never forget him. He was a chairman of the department, and I was in his organic chemistry class, and he later became president of Washington College. I remember sitting in his organic chem class, and after class one day I went back to ask a question. And he greeted me with this. He said, I don't know why you're taking my class. Blacks don't have the facility for the sciences, he said to me. He said, so it's going to be tough for you in my class. I remember listening to him with a sense of not believing what I was hearing. And I was too shocked at what I was hearing to even respond to that. So I left him with that thought in mind and continued the class. And there was another time when I went back to see him for something else. And he said the same thing. He started the conversation with, I don't know why you're in my class. You know, it's going to be tough for you in this class. Blacks don't have the capability, the capacity, he said, for learning the sciences. It was at that point I knew that this professor had a problem. Well, the first semester he gave me the first D I ever earned in my life as a student. But I thought, you know, I was hopeful. I said, okay, so he gave me the D. I'm going to prove to him that I do have the capacity. So I'm going to stay in this class and work harder. And I did. I even got one of the smarter students to study with me. And, you know, just because I took seriously what he said, not that I didn't have the capacity, but if I needed, you know, some help, I was willing to get help. Well, the next semester, I got the first F I have ever gotten in my life. Never got grades like that. Even in the science courses I took in high school, never. Honors physics, chemistry, biology, never that kind of grade. All A's. Nothing less than a B plus. And here I was at Washington College being told I didn't have the capacity for the sciences. And I was taking courses for pre-med because my goal at the university that rejected me because I was black was to go into medicine. Well, I decided at that point that I needed to get away from this professor because he was trying to flunk me out of this school. So I changed majors that next year and went for English Lit. That wasn't as smooth a course either because there were some problems with professors there, at least one in particular. I'll tell you the story briefly that I was taking a course, Renaissance, England, I think it was, and we had just done a test, turned in our blue books for a test that we completed, and I went back to him for something that I can't remember now. He was in his office, and as I walked up to his office, there was an opening in the door where I could see him sitting at the desk grading the blue books. So when I saw that my blue book was on the top, the next to be graded, I stopped to look. And I saw him pick up my blue book without opening it, mark a C on it, do the motion for a C, and put it in the stack. At that point, I walked into his office and I said, "Excuse me, Professor." I said, "But is that my blue book you just put on the pile?" And he looked and he said, "Yes, it is." I said, "Well, I'm sorry, but as I was coming, I saw you mark a C on my blue book without opening it, without even reading it." And he got kind of flustered and said, "Oh no, I had read it before, and I was noticing that I hadn't put a mark on it." These are the kinds of things that I ran into initially. And I guess in some sense throughout my experience at Washington College, where I was dumbed down grade-wise, not given the grades that I earned, but giving the grades that they thought I deserved. And I knew that this was wrong, but there was nobody to talk to about that, really. There were personal incidents. One time I was chased across campus by, I'll say it, 3 redneck white boys who had seen the 2 white girls I was with leave a wedding and followed us back to the dorm. They did not know I was in the car. So when we got back to the dorm, we parked in the parking lot. And as they got out of the car, the 3 guys were going to approach them. I think maybe to ask for a date or just kind of talk. You know, the town guys did that all the time. But when I got out of the car, I heard behind me, there's a nigger with them. And I heard them start forward, coming toward us. And at that point, I just took off running. And I outran everybody. I ran so fast across the parking lot. There was a fence separating the parking lot from my dorm at that time. And I'm telling you, I leaped over that fence in one single leap. And I don't know how I did it. The next day I went back to look at that fence, and I was saying, I'm not even that athletic, and I don't know how I did that. But I guess adrenaline and angels got me over that fence, and I made it safely in the dorm. These are tough memories, of course, but I made it through. And I was more determined at that time to change the status quo, the culture of this university, because what was happening to me should not be happening to anybody else. And I made it my mission at Washington College for the next few years to make sure that that college had more black students than just one at a time. One of the things that I'm most proud of is the fact that we started the first black African American student association. By my junior year, recruiting had gotten up to about 3 blacks that came in my junior year, which would have been 1968, 60, yeah, somewhere around there. And as soon as they came, we formed that group. Because all of us were experiencing the same things. Those guys that came in, Bill and Bill, one day they found something racist hanging from their door. It might have been a rope or it might have been a noose or something, I don't remember. But they were subjected to a lot of harassment as well. The thing about the colleges, Washington College admitted black students, but they never welcomed them. We were like an experiment. They put us in a test tube and waited to see what would happen, to see how the other students would react, how they would treat us. But they never did anything to say to those students, this is the new norm. We're letting blacks in now, and we expect you to treat them equally as you would expect to be treated yourselves. You know, the test tube experiment didn't work. It only served to separate and divide us from the rest of the students. I'm proud of the fact that I fought back against that. And I forced the college in some ways to make a change. I remember I was on campus when Martin Luther King was shot that night, April 1968. I was on dorm duty. And I could hear the TV from the TV room, but I couldn't really tell what was going on. Then a white girl comes out of the TV room and she looks right at me and she says, "I'm glad he's dead. Good riddance." And she walks away. Well, I don't know what she's talking about, so I just continue studying and doing my work while I was on door duty. So then the elevator opens and one of my friends comes out and she's in tears. She's crying. And I'm saying, "What's going on? Why are you crying?" And she says to me, "They've killed him. They've killed Martin Luther King." Well, I got up from the desk and I went into the where the television was to find out what was going on the news. And I found out that indeed Martin Luther King had been shot and killed. I don't even know what my reaction was. I didn't cry, I didn't break down. I just kind of like was stoic in a sense. And I started back to my room with my crying friend, my friend who was breaking down in tears, a very nice white girl that I had befriended and had befriended me. And we went back to my room and she just broke down and I ended up having to console her. So she said, "Well, what are you going to do, Carolyn?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "But I can't stay here." So eventually we parted and I went to bed and woke up the next morning, went to breakfast as usual. And then I began to hear news reports about all these places that were closing down in honor of Martin Luther King, and there were schools and businesses and things that were closing. And I waited to hear what Washington College was going to do. And it turned out that they weren't going to do anything. And I became livid at that point. I marched across campus to the administration and I told them, I said, if you don't close this university down in sympathy with your black workers and to honor the memory of this great man, you will never hear the end of it. I will make sure that the world knows that you didn't care. Well, that must have hit a nerve somewhere along the line, because the next thing that I heard from them was that they were calling a meeting of all the black workers on campus, which were mainly maintenance and the maids in the dorm and people in the kitchen, that kind of thing, and that I was invited to attend. So I did. At the meeting, the manager of the department told them that they were free to go home for the rest of the day, and they could be off the next day if they chose to. Only essential workers had to come. And indeed, some of them did go home. But after that, I went back to my dorm and I packed my bags and I told my friend, I gotta go. I can't stay here. I'm going home. So she walked me down to the bus station and we were waiting for the bus to come. And the bus finally came. I got on board and I was getting to my seat and I looked out the window and she had just dissolved. My friend had dissolved in tears. And I thought, wow, she's more upset than I am. When I got home, I went immediately, found a way to go to Atlanta, and I went to the funeral of Martin Luther King, and then I came back home, and my mom told me that the school had called. I said, what did they say? She said they wanted to know when you're coming back. No, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. They wanted to know if I was coming back. There's a difference. So I decided at that moment, I won't let them win. I'm not going to let them have their way. I'm not going to stay home, resign.